The Dallas Stars are going into the Christmas break riding high off a huge win over their division rivals, the Minnesota Wild. On today's show, I'll be teaming up with Seth Toupal of Locked on Minnesota Wild to break down last night's huge Dallas Stars win. We'll talk about what we liked and disliked from our respective teams. And then to wrap up the show, we'll talk a little bit about the recent NHL news of the shutdown between now and the end of Christmas. All of this coming up on a Tuesday edition of Locked on Stars.
You're Locked on Stars, your daily podcast on the Dallas Stars. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to a special crossover edition of Locked on Wild and Locked on Stars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you for making both Locked on Wild and Locked on Stars your first listen every day. Just as a reminder, both shows are free and available wherever you listen to podcasts. On the agenda for today, we recap the Dallas Stars 7-4 win over the Minnesota Wild. What went right for the Stars? What went wrong for the Wild? And in case you missed it, a little bit of news with the NHL that we will discuss as well. My name is Seth Toupal, host of Locked on Wild, joined by the host of Locked on Stars, Dane Lewis. And Dane, after a 7-2 romp for the Minnesota Wilds, the last time these two teams faced off, Dallas gets the last laugh, winning 7-4. So let's just dive right in. What were some of the big things that you noticed in the game tonight that went well for the Stars?
Yeah, I think the biggest takeaway from this game from the Stars side of things, and something they didn't do particularly well about a month ago when these teams met up in Minnesota, is they just found a lot of really good consistency within the offensive zone, especially early in the game whenever the Stars were back, a while back, winning 7 games in a row. A lot of those games started out with a goal within the first minute or 2 minutes of the game, and the Stars were able to do that tonight with that so dangerous top line. Joe Pavelski puts the first goal past Cam Talbot for the Stars, and I think that was just huge for the momentum for this Stars team, and they never really gave up. Esa Lindell obviously getting the shorthanded goal not too much longer after that, but then Ryan Hartman came back down. It looked like we were in for quite the shootout, quite the instant classic between these two teams in the early stages of this game. But I think up until kind of the end of the game when Minnesota pulled Talbot with about 9 minutes left in the game, I think Dallas controlled the offensive zone really well. A little bit harder to do that when you're playing 6-on-5. But I don't think I'd ever seen a goalie get pulled that early into the third period. But I think that was the smart move by Minnesota. I mean, down 3 goals, trying to get off a losing streak of their own. And, with just all the frustrating schedule inconsistencies that the team has had. I think that they really challenged the Stars, but thankfully the Stars were able to hold together and kind of stand their ground. And Jamie Benn getting the dagger in the empty net eventually. It took a little bit of time, but, I really liked what I saw offensively from the Stars tonight. A nice change of pace against what we saw back when they lost 5 straight last week.
And, the thing that I noticed kind of flipping it to what I observed about the Stars is, from a goaltending perspective, I mean, people will look at the box score and say 4 goals, that's not it's not the best. But at the same time, the Wild have had a handful of those games so far this year where you don't necessarily need your goalie to be on their A game. You just need them to make some of the big saves throughout the course of the game. And, the Stars did what they needed to do. Obviously, when your offense gets out to that early push 2-1, and then, it got tied up at 2-2, then 3-2, and from there they never looked back. Very much a Wild script for how they've won a lot of games so far this year.
Yeah, certainly. And not to take too much credit away from the Wild, because some of those goals were really nice and well played, especially the Kaprizov one. But Jake Guttinger, as you mentioned, giving up 4 goals, and definitely nothing to scoff at from an offensive side, I think, on an average night. And some of those goals, Minnesota just made really good plays on some kind of broken, wild puck type situations. I think even that Fiala goal in the third period was kind of the same idea. The puck got a little bit loose, but, the Wild were just in a good position to make a nice play. But I didn't hate what I saw from Ottinger, but definitely not his best performance. But I'm sure that he and the team are glad to get the win. But I mean, and I think that's just one of the strengths of this Wild team is, they can just strike so quickly, and they have guys that can, perform even when things are kind of going crazy with the play broken, especially that Kaprizov goal. I think it bounced off 2 or 3 guys, and he was kind of falling backwards and still got the puck on the net. And so really good effort by him, and clearly not a fluke goal from him, as I know he's having a fantastic sophomore season. But overall, liked what I saw from Ottinger, and did a pretty good job overall against a team in Minnesota that can, could have easily put up 7 goals in this game as well. And they did put up 7 goals against the Stars last time they met up.
Quite a bit of physicality in this one tonight. There were a couple of different fights, and I don't know if that's just a result of the last time that these two teams matched up, or where the Wild are at with having had a handful of games postponed here within the last 2 weeks. But it's something that I think we missed out on so much last year with some of those good Central Division rivalries, and Wild Stars is obviously tied together from the history of the team. And so, you don't like to see like the fighting kind of impact the game, but at the same time, I don't mind seeing a little bit of a little bit of a chippiness, physicality between these two teams. It's just nice to have those Central Division rivalries back.
Yeah, it's been really nice to see. A lot of the games that the Stars have played against Central Division opponents have had a little bit of that chippiness to them, maybe outside of Arizona as they're still kind of getting acquainted to the division, but still even those games for Dallas were physical and kind of really close games, some of the more tighter margins as far as the final score goes. But yeah, I know Jamie Benn had to get held back by his brother at one point after a little altercation, and he got sent to the penalty box. So yeah, as much as you don't want to see too many fights in the game, I think it's always good for the game to fuel a little bit within the players, just when there's kind of that physical edge and a little bit of confrontation involved. Especially, like you said, these teams missed each other last season, didn't play each other at all, so it had been a while since they'd been together. And I think that first game had a little bit of physicality to it, but then it got out of hand about the midway point of that first meeting. And so it lost a little bit of its touch, but this game was a little bit closer for a little bit longer. So it had a little bit more edge to it.
If you had to anoint a player of the game for the Stars for the win, who would you go with?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I want to almost give it either Tyler Seguin or Miro Heiskanen. I think I'll give it to Tyler just because he's been under so much fire recently, and rightfully so. He hasn't been playing very well. But I think, he had 1 goal tonight, obviously. And overall, I think played a really good game. Had some other really nice looks at the net throughout the game. Miro Heiskanen hadn't scored a goal in a while either. Still been involved with the Stars team, kind of coming off a non-COVID related illness. But nice to see him get back in the scoring column as well as far as a goal. But I think Tyler Seguin, and that's why I have his jersey up behind me if you're watching the video version. Nice to see 91 get back on track. And hopefully we'll see that more from him after this kind of Christmas holiday break that's now extended. And maybe we'll see 91 take back a little bit more of his former self as the season continues to go on, because the Stars desperately need him and several other guys to step up if they're going to continue to try to make up some ground in this division.
For sure. And we'll talk kind of about the current state of the NHL a little bit at the end of the show today, but we are going to flip to some of the things that went wrong for the Wild. Obviously, on the Wild front, a big injury in tonight's game that is not looking good for Joel Eriksson Ek. So we'll talk about that and some of the other things that went wrong for the Wild when we continue today's crossover edition of Locked On Wild and Locked On Stars after this. You listen to podcasts for the power of the inside track. You switch to Boost Mobile for the power of saving money. Because with Boost, you get the power of a free 5G phone so you can listen to the latest episodes and keep up with your favorite players and teams. The power of 3 unlimited data lines for $30 a month per line so your family can share all the insights. And the power of one of America's largest 5G networks so you can do it all at the speed of 5G. With all that money you'll save and all that edge you'll gain, just how powerful will you become? Switch to Boost Mobile and find out. Get a free Samsung Galaxy A32 5G when you switch to one of America's largest 5G networks. More power to save, Boost Mobile. Free phone limited to new customers and 1 per line. Additional restrictions apply. Offers and coverage not available everywhere or for all phones and networks. See boostmobile.com for details. Continuing today's crossover edition of Locked On Wild and Locked On Stars. Thank you for making both Locked On Stars and Locked On Wild your first listen every day. And just as a reminder, both shows are free and available wherever you listen to podcasts and whenever you listen to podcasts. Seth Toupal joined by Locked On Stars host Dane Lewis. Dane, on the Wild side of things, it's been a rarity, but not a particularly good night for Cam Talbot. And it was a little bit of the opposite of what we saw in the Buffalo Sabres loss. In that, Talbot really was the only one, it seemed, that that kept the team in the game against the Sabres. Whereas tonight, he had a little bit of a rough one, but the team was trying to pick him up, and we've talked at points. Wild fans have expressed displeasure with how the goaltending situation started out, and for this to be kind of the blemish on Talbot's ledger over the last 5 or 6 games, it's going to happen. Every now and again, you're going to have a goalie just that does not have a particularly good night. And on this night, the Dallas offense was just a little bit better than the Wild's offense.
Yeah, and I think it's so interesting because I think both teams were led by their top lines, and I know we've talked a little bit about it on Twitter about which team had the best top line, and I think right now it's the Stars had their moments, but the Wild had their moments as well. And I think just the Stars top line got off to a little bit of a quicker start, and historically this season, that's been the recipe for success for this Stars team. So curious to see how these matchups will unfold as the rest of the season goes on, because we know these teams will match up a few more times this season. But you mentioned it kind of before we took a break. What have you heard or seen post game regarding Joel Eriksson Ek? Obviously, like you said, in a sling, looking like he might be out for a little bit of time over the coming days. So, what have you seen or heard regarding his status?
Let me pull up the latest tweet from Michael Russo, if I can find it. There have been a lot of comments on it. From what we were told, Eriksson Ek was seen in a sling heading onto the team bus after the game, and from what Dean Evison said, it's not looking particularly good. So it looks as though we are going to be without the services of the Wild's top center, which is a huge loss for this team, on top of losing Jared Spurgeon and not having him available for tonight's game. So obviously that's just a massive loss for this team. As for how they will fill that spot on the roster, it remains to be seen. Most likely is going to be just a call up at this point and a elevation of one of the other centers on the roster. But as the guy that not only is one of the top players on this team, but also does a really good job of pestering and frustrating his opponents, that's a very tough spot on the roster to fill. And so obviously that void was pretty evident when Eriksson Ek left the game and didn't return. That's when things started to kind of get out of hand for the Wild a little bit more in particular.
Yeah, and it just seemed like that was maybe kind of the straw that broke the camel's back for this Wild team, as they've been through so much just with scheduling and obviously the whole NHL now is kind of in that realm. How much do you think that this loss is attributed to the scheduling conflicts rather than maybe the Stars, I guess, outplaying, you could say, the Wild? How much do you think that the scheduling makes an impact on the outcome of this game?
I think it weighs in because obviously the last game that the Wild played was against the. Well, now I got to pull it up so that I don't sound like I don't know what I'm talking about. But obviously the Wild's schedule has been just completely thrown off. The last game that the Wild played was, of course, against the Buffalo Sabres, but before that, you have to go all the way back to their final game of the road trip against the Vegas Golden Knights, in which they lost 6-4, and that was back on December 12th. So the Wild played that game on the 12th against the Golden Knights, and then they had the game against the Carolina Hurricanes postponed. They lost to Buffalo on Thursday. Then they had Saturday's game postponed against Florida, and now they had Thursday's game against Detroit postponed as well. So I'd like to give credit to Dallas because I think they came out and they played better to start the game, and obviously that is a huge factor into why the Wild lost. But it's hard to ask a team, I think, to play a game, to get ready for a game, have it postponed, then play another game, then have the game after that postponed. And it's too much start and stop, I think. And, I'm not going to attempt to blame the NHL for announcing the full stop of the season until after Christmas. Seems a little odd to do it during the only game on the schedule. And again, I'm not trying to suggest that factored in, but it's just one of the prices you pay, I guess, for being one of the only teams not dealing with COVID-19, is that if you're playing a bunch of teams that are dealing with it and those games get postponed, then you're not playing either. So it's one of those just bad situations. And it's just the unfortunate part of where the schedule's at right now, is that it seems like every time the Wild try to play a game, it ends up getting postponed.
Yeah, I think that it, at least from a Stars perspective, I think that, myself and other fans recognize that it's good that Dallas won this game, but it comes, doesn't just come as a normal win against, a healthy Minnesota team that's been playing consistently. I think just with the grit and grind of any sports season, players and coaches get into their routine, and they do the things that they do at practices, morning skates, and things like that, game planning. And when all of that gets thrown out of, its consistency, I think that that's definitely something that, can affect a team and, get the worst result out of them, and, cost them to lose games. And yeah, certainly weird that, they hadn't played since the 16th, and now they potentially won't play again until 2022 in the Winter Classic. Who knows if that Winnipeg game scheduled for the 27th is going to get to be played then. I can't imagine that it will, but I guess you never know. But certainly something to factor in for the Stars, which nice that they were able to capitalize on that. But of course, difficult for the Minnesota Wild, their team, their fans, their personnel, just, makes it so difficult. And I don't know how the Stars have avoided COVID troubles. They've had several guys that have been sick with non-COVID related illnesses. But as far as I know, at the time of recording this, no positive tests within the team and the organization. So I don't know how that happens and how so many other teams are just ridden with COVID. I guess that's just the nature of the beast sometimes. But yeah, there was a moment, throughout the day today and Monday in preparation for the game, where I was like, maybe something will pop up for either team and we'll see a cancellation. But yeah, also very odd, like you said, for the NHL to announce the cancellation in the middle of this game, in the middle of the second period. Just felt super odd, super off to me as well.
Yeah, and I mean, to take a positive from this game, I mean, this is one that I'm gonna pretty heavily suggest just gets flushed from the memory banks. But Kevin Fiala, 2 goals tonight. It was good to see him get going. It's been a struggle for Fiala, and not a lot of that is necessarily his fault with the line mates that he's been put on and the spot in the lineup that he's been put for most of the season. But it was really good to see him get back into the swing of things with a couple of goals. Could nearly have had a third. And the last time he scored, went on the show and tried to hype up, hopefully, him kind of getting to that run that we know he's capable of. And so now I'm going to do it again, and hoping that this is the first couple of a long line of goals for Fiala to kind of get back to where he should be scoring wise. But I guess we'll see.
Yeah, he was definitely giving the Stars some fits tonight, even moments where he wasn't scoring. Just about any time he had the puck, he made me nervous watching the game. Certainly a very gifted player on a very gifted lineup that, still, Kirill Kaprizov, like I said, nice goal. Ryan Hartman, nice goal for the Star or for the Wild against the Stars, and just not the outcome that Minnesota was looking for. But maybe we'll get to see both these teams match up, and later on in this season with healthy rosters and with a little bit more consistency in the schedule.
Yeah, I agree fully. So Kevin Fiala, I think, would be my player of the game for tonight. Let's look at we talked a little bit about it, but let's look at kind of where things are at with the NHL and when we can start to look at potentially having games back on the schedule. We'll finish up today's crossover episode of Locked On Wild and Locked On Stars after this.
Today's episode of Locked On Stars and Locked On Wild is brought to you by BetOnline.ag. BetOnline has you covered all season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before as football season continues to march towards the playoffs. BetOnline remains your number one spot for all the sports action this season. Head to the new, updated desktop or mobile website to sign up today and receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Just use our promo code Locked On to receive your bonus. From basketball, football, NHL, boxing, and UFC, right down to your favorite Vegas casino games, don't wait to take advantage of all the amazing offers available for the 2021 season. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to bet all of your favorite sports. BetOnline, where the game starts.
Final segment of today's episode of Locked On Wild and Locked On Stars. Thank you for making both shows your first listen every day. And Dane, obviously, as we talked about, it was announced during the game that the entirety of the NHL has been put on a little bit of a pause until after Christmas. There was a break in there already, but from the sounds of it, things will be put on a little bit of a hold here, and then they will reassess and try to get the schedule back in order. After that, I mean, it's the right call. I'm not going to argue that one bit because of where things are at with multiple teams having been fully shut down, and the fact that the two teams that squared off here tonight were two of the last few standing without any COVID-19 issues. My question though is like, how do we hit the play button again? Like what does the NHL need to do in order to kind of keep things rolling here? Obviously, the Winter Classic is a huge target for the NHL to try to get that game off without a hitch. But like, does the season just start after January 1st? Like, what do we need to do to hit the play button again?
Yeah, I totally agree. As frustrating as it is to see this pause, just because of how exciting this season has been, I think it's the right decision in terms of looking to get the season back to normal. My only concern, and I know several other people have mentioned it too, is what they're going to do with these games that have been postponed. There's talks of maybe during that February stretch with the Olympics of trying to get games redone then, but also many people have brought up that the owners of those arenas where teams play weren't just going to let their buildings sit empty and quiet for 2 weeks. They were going to have concerts or, some kind of event in those buildings. And so I'm curious to see what the NHL's course of action is for getting these games that have been postponed to be rescheduled, because a lot of these games are, at least I know the Stars have a game that was canceled on Wednesday against another divisional opponent in the Jets, as well as on Thursday against the Blackhawks. So these are super important games for the Stars, and I know several other teams as well looking, to play key divisional games or games against some other, top talent in the NHL. So I think that's kind of the biggest question. But I think, as far as trying to get things back on schedule as normal, I think this is the right call as of right now. As difficult as that is, for myself, and I know you and other people who cover this league, and even just fans of this league, and probably even the teams to kind of go through. I think if we have any chance of, getting back on track, hopefully kind of this break will slow the spread a little bit, allow people to recover. And I know, that there's several players I know I talked about on the show the other day that several players have already gotten their vaccination boosters. And so I know the players, and it seems team personnel are doing all that they can do in order to, get back to normal here with the schedule. And so it's just kind of a matter of how the NHL front office wants to kind of see things play out.
Yeah, and it brings up the other big ticket item that has not yet been announced, but it seems like it's certainly trending towards not happening. That, of course, being the Olympics. And I don't know when we'll get the definitive official word that that the NHL is not sending players to the Olympics, but I gotta feel like with this announcement that announcement is going to be coming relatively soon.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like, by the time this comes out on Tuesday, there's a good chance that there could have already been an announcement made. Maybe the NHL wanted to hold off after dropping their other news in the middle of the only NHL game on the schedule to bum everybody out that was watching it. So maybe, by the time that this is out, people are hearing this, there's already been an announcement made. But yeah, I totally agree that it kind of feels like a win rather than an if at this point.
Just looking at the schedule for both teams, obviously the Winter Classic is circled on the calendar several times in permanent marker. That game is going to happen for sure. I can't speak to whether or not the Wild will play Winnipeg because travel to Canada has been shut down by the NHL for now. So it's very possible in previewing tonight's game. I put the episode title as One Final Tune-Up for the Winter Classic. It's very possible that that ends up being the final game that the Wild play before the new year, which would be just crazy. And that's just kind of where we're um, at this point. We just gotta, I guess, wait and see what happens, and hope that things pick up after there. What do the Stars have coming up, Dane, for games after this one?
Yeah, I got the schedule pulled up right here. Their next game, as of right now, will be at home on Monday, the 27th, which the NHL did announce tonight. That's when they expect things to pick back up. I think teams can report back to their facilities on the 26th after like 2 o'clock in their own time zone, but then games will resume on the 27th. Dallas keeps the divisional games going. They've started on the 14th, played St. Louis. And I mean, I think to close out this month, they have Nashville at home on the 27th, and then a trip to Colorado on the 29th, and then back home on the 31st on New Year's Eve for another date with the Avalanche. And so some big games for Dallas coming up. Like I said, a lot of big divisional games, and hopefully, these won't get postponed because these are huge, huge games as far as the implications of standings go, and who's going to fall where. Because after Monday night's win, I think Dallas is only like 2 or 3 points behind Winnipeg, and Colorado's not too far behind, too far above them. And Nashville, surprising a lot of people this season. I think they're second in the division right now,
Yep.
as where things stand. And so, and Dallas took a pretty bitter loss to them earlier in the season. Back on, I think November 10th was that game. So it's been a while since they've met up. But Nashville and Dallas, I would say, the Predators are probably the Stars' biggest rivals, and I think many people would say that. So always exciting to watch those teams get together. So fans can only hope that we're going to get to see that one play out. And the Stars, a very different team than they were back on November 10th when they played this Predators team for the first time. And I think that there's potential for that to be an exciting game for the Stars as well.
Well, we'll hold our breath and wait and see kind of how things play out here after the holidays. But that'll put a bow on today's crossover episode between Locked on Wild and Locked on Stars. So now that your first listen for both shows is done, make sure to swing over to Locked on Bets for your second listen of the day, your daily one-stop shop for all of your gambling needs. Locked on Bets is hosted by your boy Q with expert analysis and insight from Lee Sterling. Locked on Bets is free and available on all podcast platforms, just like both Locked on Wild and Locked on Stars. Available everywhere you listen to podcasts, available anytime you listen to podcasts. Make sure to follow both shows to keep up to date on both the Dallas Stars and the Minnesota Wild throughout the rest of the 2021-2022 season. And you can find new episodes for both shows every Monday through Friday as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.